So today we have Steve Walker. Thank you very much for coming in. And so what I thought we'd start by doing is just a brief about you. If you could say, where it all started for you.
Well, where it all started for me was that at one stage in my life, I ended up being a junkie myself. So therefore, I've got quite a lot of experience around drug and alcohol addiction and other addictive behaviours. I think for me, I would say that where I was working up until I retired, I was working at the Leys community, which was a drug and alcohol rehabilitation centre, which I worked at for approximately 33 years. Actually, after doing a program there myself 5 years before that, which at that time was quite a long, hefty period for a situation of going through rehabilitation. My rehabilitation there went from sort of like 15 to 18 months, and that's living in.
Yeah.
And that wasn't a case of going home at weekends or anything like that. This was purely in therapy. I mean, I ended up being the director of the program and also the registered manager.
Okay.
Which isn't bad for someone who of my sort of stature, really. I mean, I was brought up in London. I live with my gran and grandmother.
Yeah.
And basically, my father and my mother left me on my grandmother's doorstep when I was 11 months old. Okay. And got brought up by them. And obviously, there was a lot of difference in the way that I was brought up. In comparison to other children, because the age gap made different rules for me than what was being made for the rest of the children. But that's basically where I started.
Did you see your dad, or?
The only ever time I ever really got to see my dad was when I was misbehaving, and he would always be pissed.
Yeah.
He was definitely he was a very violent man, and realistically, a lot of his traits became my traits at the end of the day. You know, being involved in violence, being involved with alcohol, drugs, and everything else was all there. It's all manifested there, really. I mean, I was very unruly as a child. I think it may have been down to the fact that perhaps I had, I was dyslexic, and I still am dyslexic. I don't think that ever goes away.
No.
And ADHD, I believe, but wasn't seen as something then.
Back then, it's just a misbehaving child, isn't it? Is that
yes, right? Yeah, a child that wouldn't do as it's told, you know, and had its own opinions and did what it wanted. Rather than, you know, but that wasn't how I was in the very beginning. I mean, how I was in the very beginning was that I believe I was brought up as a good child. You know, I actually used to do all the errands for the old people up and down the street, never used to nick their change or nothing like that, you know, and I was a good kid. And in my school days, I ended up in a very difficult situation where, because being dyslexic, not having a mum and dad, used to have the mickey taken out of me, then basically, you know, people picking on me, nicking my dinner money and stuff, or sandwiches that I take to school. So obviously, at some stage, that snapped, and obviously I was in a situation where it was the school bully that was creating the issue for me, and eventually I bashed him up. Okay. Then all of a sudden I realised that there was something good about this, because now I'm the one that people were respecting me, and I found that I wasn't in any trouble, and for me that felt quite good, because I spent a number of years being bullied and pushed about, and so all of a sudden I'd found a way to stop all this, and I didn't need it because it was very scary.
Yeah.
And it was the same sort of thing when I actually moved on to my secondary school. Ended up in the very same situation where I was being bullied. I ended up, you know, and then I started to rebel, you know, because I was getting to a place where I wasn't being easily managed at home by my grandparents. I was too much of a problem to them. And so eventually I ended up being taken to the doctors and stuff like that, and ended up where I was put on to Valium at the age of 14. And that was at that particular time the very well known drug that, you know, people were given to calm them down, you know, and stuff like that. And so anyway, that's where it was. I started on Valium. I was taking sort of something like 60 milligrams a day, which I think was quite a lot for a 14-year-old child at that time. And yeah, it worked for a bit. It calmed me down, but I was still very unmanageable. I was still difficult for older people to you know, my grandparents, to keep me at bay. And I found that, you know, being, you know, involved in violence and stuff like that at a very young age, it was a way of keeping people away from me, you know, because I didn't feel that I fitted in with them. But I could fit into this situation where I can keep people at bay, not feel afraid, you know, and take some responsibility for what was coming my way. And I mean, it was all very, very difficult back then, you know. My father I would only see if he was coming round to tell me off, or you know, he pissed and stuff like that. There was a Sunday that he came round, and we were having Sunday dinner. He used to come round and have his Sunday dinner, but when he used to come round, he was always pissed and stuff like that. Well, he came round one Sunday, and my grandmother had cooked his dinner, and it gone cold, because he turned up when he feels like it, you know, and he just went completely mad. He got the dinner and smashed the plate over her head and busted all her head open wide. And back in those days, you had the old enamel butter like pal, and that was half full of blood. And obviously she had to go into hospital and stuff like that. But he was a raving lunatic. You know, I'd fallen out with a couple of friends at school, but they were my friends. You know, children fall out with each other.
Yeah.
Well, because I went home crying one Sunday when he was there, he said to me, "What are you crying for?" I said, "I've had a fight with my friend and his cousin." "Oh, have you? So what did you do?" "I didn't do anything. I've come home." "Oh, right." He said, "Well, go out in the garden and get a stick." I said, "What?" He said, "Go and get a stick or something out in the garden." So I said, "Oh, okay." Because obviously I do what he's telling me, because I'm afraid. So anyway, I'll go and get this stick. When you come back in the house, he said, "Right, let's go." I said, "Where are we going?" He said, we're going to sort this issue out." I said, "There isn't an issue, they're my friends." He said, "They are." He said, "Because if you don't go up there and beat him with that stick, I'm going to beat you with it." And he marched me up the road to the guy who was my best friend, and was still my best friend many years later. But he made me bash him with that stick and fight with him, so that, you know, it didn't happen again. And I think that really rubbed off with me, especially with the fact that I was already on tranquilizers because I couldn't really control myself and stuff like that, which started to actually lead me into using drugs, you know, because once I realized that taking these tablets and a little bit of alcohol, you know, got me to a place where perhaps I wasn't so worried, frightened, you know, and I felt that I could cope. But clearly that wasn't the way forward really for me, because that just materialised and went on to other things. You know, I've had numerous relationships which have fallen through due to the fact of having, you know, a drug addiction and stuff like that. I was a registered addict for approximately, I don't know, maybe 10 years. I was actually registered on amphetamines as well at one stage, as well as later it being changed to methadone.
Okay.
So, I mean, obviously this had taken over my life. The relationships that I had were with people of my own kind. So in other words, it was a group that I felt I fitted into.
Yeah.
You know, like where I was in my life, I wasn't sure where I fitted in. You know, and I felt that I could fit into this group of people, this gang of people that were, you know, on the other side of the law, basically. You know, breaking the rules and everything that goes along with that. You know, using drugs, alcohol. But I felt I fitted in there.
Yeah.
You know, I felt I found my place. And obviously that continued and continued until I ended up going into a situation where I was selling drugs for groups of people, and ended up getting to a place where I got involved with some really heavy people in London who were dealing big drugs, big amounts.
Yeah.
And I got involved in that. I ended up with two other guys that were my partners, and it ended up that one of those ended up being murdered by one of the main men due to the fact that he'd done a deal what was wrong. Basically, I was in a situation where this is going, obviously I'm getting older now, and I'd gone off to Amsterdam with this girl, and when I went, I left my car with one of the guys to do the deals in Battersea. So obviously he looked very much like me. We all sort of wore the same sort of clothes. He had gingery hair rather than fair hair, and you know, but looked very medallions and rings, and you know, the Jaguar, you know, with the wire wheels and the white wall tyres and all this stuff, 3.8, you know, looking the dog's bollocks, basically, feeling that you fit in. Well, you know, I went away and I went to Amsterdam with this girl, and when I was away, because I was away, I asked him to do my run. Well, he did my run, but basically what he did is he cut the stuff that badly that it went back up the chain.
Okay.
Right. I mean, anything that we sold back then, you know, we would get it in very near pure and probably cut it down to about 75%.
Okay.
What happened with this particular batch, it got cut down to about 25%. So it got back to the main man. Well, they described him. They knew the area I was doing. That was one of the areas that I was doing. Described the car, described the person who looked very much like me. Medallion, Jaguar, da-di-da. So it all came down to the fact that me and this guy at the time who ended up being murdered, we were at a house doing a deal, and the door busted in. One of the guys came in who was one of the main members, started stabbing me and bashing me over the head with a club hammer, which I eventually escaped from by just running out the back. I mean, I just jacked up a load of speed, so I was well on for let's get out of here. And I ended up going over a few gardens and run through the back door of a patio doors at those days, but they didn't have that armoured plate glass. I run straight through it into someone's room, and obviously they called the police and the ambulance and stuff like that, and they come, took me away to the hospital. So I ended up in the hospital. I got the police there all asking me questions and this, that and the other. Eventually they'd left me for a little bit and I slipped off out. Well, the main man, he rang me. He said, I want to speak to you. You know, come round my house. I said, no way. I said, look, you virtually nearly killed me. He said, I need to see you come round. So I said to him, I think about it. Eventually I thought, well, yeah, I need to try and sort this problem out. I don't need this kind of ag. But talk about trembling, you know, going to the guy's house and trying to discuss what had gone on. But when I get there, the girlfriend that I took with me to Holland, right, you know, and Amsterdam, basically was in the house. They'd kidnapped her to question her as to where I was and who I was with. And he realised then that I wasn't the person that done the deal, that it was the other guy. Well, he had done the deal, and I went there. First thing I did, as soon as I got to the door, knocked on the door, he comes out, he's got a Rizzler, and in there's a load of powder.
Yeah.
He went, you want this, do you? I said, no, I don't want anything. He went, no, it's all right, you take it. I thought, oh, is he stitching me up here? Because obviously there's all this paranoia and all this freaking out was going on in my head. So anyway, I took it because I thought I didn't take it. I didn't know where I was going to be then anyway, because it was so frightening.
Yeah.
So it ended up at the end of the day, I took this and we sat down, we discussed it, and he said to me, and I've never seen anybody like this before in my life. He said to me, he said, I know where you were, and I know it wasn't you. He said, but I'm going to kill him. And what I actually saw within his eyes was, his eyes was just jet black. And it wasn't through the drugs that he was using. They were just massive. It was frightening. He said, I'm going to kill him. And basically, that's what he did.
Yeah.
Right? And so I'm panicking, I'm flapping, I don't know what to do. I end up having to score some more gear off of him because I still tried to keep in with him to get a certain amount of money so I could get away. So I did that, and I went to live in Wales. I went right underground, I didn't sign on, I didn't do anything, I wasn't working. You know, I just took the drugs and disappeared. And so, you know, started selling that stuff. Eventually I got arrested for conspiracy to murder and trying to nail me for carrying a suitcase full of, well, not a suitcase, a briefcase full of drugs with a gun.
Yeah.
And anyway, the police were looking for me. They, you know, at one stage they thought I was dead as well because I just disappeared off the earth for about 3 years. And I mean, back then you could do that. Yeah. You know, you could go underground. We're talking many years ago.
So what would that have been? What?
I would say I think it was in the age of around about 24, 25.
Okay.
You know, a very long time ago. I mean, I'm 75 now. Yeah. So it's going back a long, long time, and you could disappear then, you know, without being seen. You know, you keep it very low profile. You do your business through people that, you know, you don't normally do business with, and that. So anyway, that's what happened there. I ended up finding out that the police were going backwards and forwards to my grandmother's. They had a Hobbs outside the house there waiting for me to come along and this, that and the other. But obviously I didn't turn up there because obviously I wasn't living there. But I got to find out about this because I kept in touch with some of my relatives, and I eventually ended up phoning the police, asking them to leave my grandmother and me alone. I'm alive. You know, I'm not telling you where I am. You know, anyway, they said that they wanted to arrest me or about this and everything else. So I said, well, look, you know, I need to think about this. So the first thing I did is I went to a solicitor. I told them what the issue was and what they was going to do and what they wanted to do. And then we ended up arranging for me to actually go into Cardiff police station and meet them there for an interview, where they brought up all these things about what had gone on, the murder, and me knowing about it, and this is your briefcase and this is your, you know, your gun and this, that. Oh, it was just horrendous. But eventually, after spending a couple of days in there, you know, backwards and forwards, I got away with it, you know. But it was always there. But there was always the fear, right, that, you know, that was they still around? Were they still out? Are they going to come and get me? Then he got arrested. And basically he was like a pig in shit, you know. Yeah, I murdered him. said, you know, oh yeah, I did. I murdered him. Yeah, he robbed me. It's not only that, he said he was fucking my wife. He said, and you know, yeah, I killed him. He was like proud of it.
Blatant, like,
yeah,
simple. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hands up.
It kind of shows that kind of person though as well, doesn't it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, these guys, they didn't mess about. They were hardcore.
So on a level, when you're saying they're at the top, what kind of
level would I say they were?
Yeah.
I would say that they was probably the next one down, because it came, the message came from the man at the very top.
Yeah.
About the gear being, you know, contaminated and whatever, you know, not being right. And so he was given the information. You need to bring me a body for this.
Yeah.
And that's what he did. He brought him a body. And so the fact that he, you know, stabbed me and done all the things that he did to me, but there are many other things that these guys were into. You know, if people didn't pay, you know what I mean, they'd go around and, you know, they'd even get me to go around and start taking their televisions and other bits and pieces, you know, to pay for their gear. You know, I remember one day he said to me, he said, see that house there? I said, yeah. He said, well, the bloke in the top of this house here, he said, owes me a lot of money. I said, oh, does he? He said, yeah. He said, you know what I'm going to do? He said, I'm going to come back and set that the house. I said, you're not? He said, I am. I said, well, what about all the other people that are living there? I don't care shit about that, he said. And I mean, they were the kinds of characters that I was involved with through my drug addiction. And I, you know, and my life history of being involved. So it got more and more to a stage where I couldn't cope and I couldn't live with myself. In the meantime, I'd had a couple of marriages that didn't last 5 minutes, because clearly the person that I was a raving lunatic. I wasn't altogether, you know, I was off of it, gone. And the relationships that I had were all of them except for the last one, were all involved with drugs, with children, and it just escalated and got worse. You know, my last relationship lasted 35 years. Yeah. Which obviously we're friends now still, but it was the best relationship I'd ever had. Yeah. You know, knew everything about me, but this was after I'd been through rehab. Yeah. And this is the rehab, which obviously I have a lot of fond memories of and strong feelings about where rehab is today. You know, I think if you're in a situation where you want to work within the rehab situation, you have to have certain qualities. Yeah. And I think that the issue that we have with rehab today is that rehab is not really rehab. I believe it to be respite. I think that you'll find that the programs that people have today are far too short.
So it's basically like a plaster.
Yeah, they're sticking a plaster on it. It's costing money to stick the plaster on, but it's not working. Mm. And I can honestly say that when I was in charge of the Leys community as the director and stuff like that, we had many successes and lots of good vibes out of it. We had people coming from all over the country. We had them coming from Spain, we had them coming from Italy, you know, people from Scotland, Wales, you know, you name it, we were pretty much the top dogs at that time. The only other competition I think we felt that we had at that time was Phoenix House. Okay. Right, but our program was a very, very rigid and hard program, and that's why it's so important that the staff members that you get are the right people. I'm not saying for 1 minute that it's all got to be done by ex-addicts, because that's not the way. No. But I don't feel that you can be a staff member in that situation relating to some people that you don't really understand. my big thing when I actually went through my rehabilitation at the Leys community was that I could identify with the people in the program, doing the program, and I could identify with the staff that had actually been through rehabilitation and understand exactly what my thoughts and feelings were and where I was coming from. And I could have conversations with them that they could identify with, which actually helped me to not feel so much alone.
Yeah.
You know, because the identification was part of the main thing that made me understand about who I was and how I operated. You know, and so for that purpose, if I was looking at a staff team, yes, I'd be looking for people that are not not too soft. The problem is you can kill people with softness and love, right? You know, if you feel that a staff member is being overly involved and being lovey-dovey, not in a sexual manner, but you know, treat them like they're their son and everything else, and not really giving them the information that they need.
Kind of babying them.
Yes, you know, because they're not babies. They're nothing like babies. They're some of the most devious people that you could ever meet. They're very clever. They're very manipulative. You know, they know ways to get what it is that they want. And when they're doing this, they're very conscious of how they're actually going about it. And if you are in a situation where you don't really understand that, you're inclined to let them get away. It's like, you know, a time when I was on probation many years ago. As I've been in and out of prison a few times. But when I was on probation, I could go to my probation officer, right, and say, oh, I haven't got any money. You know, I've got no food today, or this, that and the other. He'd go and get a petty cash slip and give me the money. Yeah. Right? What would I do with it? I'd go and use it, you know, because they were soft. Yeah. You know, they didn't say, well, you need to get out and get a job. Yeah. You know, as long as you went there and saw him once a week or once a fortnight, or whatever the court may have ordered, and just sit there and talk to you, and you've actually attended, you're doing your part. But if you went in there and you with your begging cap on, or made up some kind of excuses, or an excuse for, oh yeah, all right then, well look, oh, if you can't make it today, then could you come tomorrow? It's all that kind of stuff. Now, if you can't hold someone rigidly when you're in a system, then you're no good for the job. And it's the same when you're working in a rehab. You have to be hard. And there was many a time that I found that I was at differences of opinion with members of staff that perhaps didn't quite understand. They may have had all the qualifications, what they got out of books and everything else, but it's not the same. It's not the same for the addict. Because they're going to test with what you know and what you don't know, right? They're gonna find your weak spot. Yeah. And you used to, you know, I mean, okay, you do the interview, you interview people, you actually employ them like I've done, and then found that when I've actually got them there, they're actually against the regime that which is actually in place. Yeah. Right, which is to be a bit hard, right? To be honest, to be a little bit ruthless about what you need to tell them about themselves. And this didn't fit well with some. You know, like if someone said to me, I remember a staff member saying to me that, you know, you're a father, aren't you? And I said, yes. He said, well, what sort of father was you? Oh, I said, I was a good father. Oh, was you? Really? I said, yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think I was a really good father. Yeah, well, what did you do? Did you not buy drugs? Yeah. Did your children go without? Sometimes. And get into a crux where, you know, he turned around and said to me, you're a fucking useless father. You've done nothing. Yeah. You know, you're selfish. Now, for someone to tell you that, if they're coming from the right place, and they're telling you because they know you, because they've been you, it's very important and it's very accurate. And it was when things like that were being said to me when I was in my rehabilitation that made it work for me, because I could actually see that that person was being sincere and honest with me about who I am and how I behave and what I do in certain circumstances. They could read me like a book. The same as I, you know, after all the years that I worked, I could sit in an interview with people, you know, who have been involved in drugs or anything else, and basically I could see through them, see in their eyes. I could tell whether they were lying or whether they wasn't lying, you know. So all of this stuff was very important for the staff team, right? So some of the staff team that I believe you should have is that you should have perhaps social work involvement, right? And also, you know, like when we were doing our assessments of people, to make sure that we were picking them to ask the right questions, right, you know, put them in the right setting, and actually be in the job not because it's about earning money and trying to further your education, but actually to stop killing people or helping people kill themselves, right? Because basically, you know, you had mothers and fathers, right, buying drugs for their sons and daughters because they didn't want them to go out and steal. Now, I mean, to me, that is completely ludicrous, because basically they're feeding their habit. They're actually killing their own children, you know? But for them, they didn't want them to get in any trouble. They didn't even think about the fact that they may end up being prosecuted or nicked themselves, going to these people, buying drugs and stuff like that. They thought they were doing the right thing, you know? And drug addicts are not just people that are the dregs of society, you know? Some of these things have come from places that you would never believe. You know, I've treated people who have been in Eton, you know, and stuff like that. And it all started off for that particular person due to the fact that his father wanted him to be a doctor because he was a doctor. But he didn't want to be a doctor. He wanted to be something else. So his father was pushing him into being somebody that he didn't want to be, which his escapism was alcohol and drugs. You're not talking about someone who's been brought up in a deprived area or got no money or nothing like that. You're talking about someone messing with somebody's head, trying to turn them into a direction that they don't want to be in. You know, so when you're talking about, you know, the kind of education that you need to give these people, it starts from a long, long time before they even start all that. And you get the other side where you get the parent who's actually been all their life, they've been on the dole, right? They use drugs, you know, they use them around their children grow up, they see them behaving in this way. They're their role models. This is my mum, this is my dad, this is the way they behave, you know, and it's all right for me. If they can do it, I can do it. Seems all right, they seem okay, because that's what they're used to. So all of a sudden, this person who come into this world, who was never anything apart from a little embryo, turns into a fucking nasty person. Horrible, right? Because of his upbringing. You know, not enough intervention at the time when it's needed. You know, people know when people are using drugs and stuff at home. I'm not saying you should take the kids off the children, off the mother and father. I'm saying that you need to get in there and you need to put a stop to all of it, you know, and get involved in making sure that the right education is available and stuff like that. It starts very early. So there's loads and loads of stuff there.
So something I wanted to go back to just quickly, if it's right, is so prison. So did you start any young offenders? Is that,
yes, I started off. I actually started off. I went to detention. When I went to detention, that was for doing smash and grab burglaries on jewellers.
Which again was to feed the habit.
Yes. Yeah, which was to feed the habit.
But something I remember reading in your book, you always said, is the fact of obviously you did the smash and grabs and stuff, but you always worked.
Yes.
You always worked hard.
Yeah.
You know, your work ethic, there was nothing that, it was just like you said earlier, people claiming benefits, blah, blah. You went out every day, you grafted, but that was just to get a bit extra, wasn't it? Is that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I always worked. I always made sure that when I went home to my grandmother, I always paid my rent and stuff like that. You know, I can't honestly blame them for anything that's happened to me because it's my responsibility. Yeah. But, you know, I always made sure that the money was there. I always went to work. I enjoyed work.
Yeah.
Right? But for my extra activities, I needed extra money.
Yeah.
You know, the more I was using, the more I needed to earn. But, you know, I didn't really, stop working. I always worked because I'm one of those people, and I'm still like it today. I've always got to be doing something because I don't like to let my mind stand still because I think it'll just screw me up. You know, I might as well just pack up.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, so I've always been constantly on the go doing something.
So on on the detention, how long was that for?
I got 9 months in a detention centre, a place called Latchmere House.
And so just
that's where a lot of problems started showing up.
That's what I was going to ask. Is how did that cope with obviously going from using to then going in there? Did that was there any help in there, or was it worse?
Not worse. No, there wasn't any help. But I will tell you something. It did do some things for me, right? But the major problem is fitting in.
Yeah.
Right. You know, like I always remember the first day I went there. I've never been there. I've been in remand before, but this is the first little sentence I've ever had. And I remember going in, and as you go into reception, this screw comes up to me and said, "Name?" I said, "Steve." He said, "Name?" I said, "Steve Walker." Right. He said, "When you talk to me, you call me sir." I said, "Since when you been fucking knighted?" You know, and that was my immediate approach.
Yeah.
Right. You know, that I wasn't going to take no bollocks from you. And at that particular time, I was a nasty fucker. You know, I was still young, but I was very.
Yeah.
So you know, I ended up gets into there. I'd got married before I went in there.
So what age was that then?
19.
Oh, okay.
Right, I got married before I went there. And all of a sudden I hear through the grapevine, right, because you hear everything when you're in prison, that someone's screaming my wife.
Yeah.
Right. And then I get it from some of the people that are in there who come from my area, who started talking about it. So we used to do things like make playpens or work in cable shops and things like that in there. And one day I'm in the cable shop where you're working with club hammers and big chisels, and you're chopping down this cable.
Okay.
And this bloke comes up to me and he said, "I hear your wife's being fucked by so and so." That was it. I had him across the fucking table. I had the hammer in my hand. I was just about to bash his head in with this hammer when the screws jumped on me to stop me. So I get put in the block. This behaviour continues. Like, you have to go to evening classes and stuff like that. Well, I wouldn't go to any of the evening classes. The only evening class I would go to is to gym.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, no maths, no, you know, no C of E or church, you know, none of that. Right, I'm not having none of that. All I want to do is build myself up like a fucking. I come out of there, I had a neck like that, and fucking like Arnold, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know, because I was filled with so much anger.
Yeah.
But at that time, I had that much anger. They actually ended up putting me in a hospital.
Okay.
In London to have me assessed because my anger was that bad that they were just trying to calm me down, and ended up at some stage where they were using what's it called? Used to be called a liquid cosh. I can't remember what it was called. Largactil. Started putting me on Largactil, and that still wasn't working.
So what's that, like a suppressant type of?
Yeah. Largactil is things that they used to use in mental hospitals where they sedate you so you're a bit like a zombie, you know. So anyway, that didn't really work either. So anyway, they do all of this kind of stuff, and so I goes in this hospital, and the screw's taken me. Comes into the interview with me and the doctor, and he's talking, and the doctor says, "Oh, would you like a fag?" He's not allowed to smoke because you can't smoke when you're in detention.
Okay.
Right? Can't do anything like that. I said, "Oh, well, I wouldn't mind a fag." He said, "You're not allowed." He said to the screw, he said, "Let me tell you, whilst he's in this hospital, he's in my care, not yours." He said, he's going to be here, and he's going to go through these tests and everything that we want him to. But whilst he's here, if he wants to have a fag, he will have a fag. Because I was old enough to smoke, you know. So, anyway, I went through all these tests, and it worked out that they said that there was something wrong, that one side of my brain was working better than the other. It was all jargon to me. I didn't understand any of it anyway. I didn't really take a lot of notice of it. It was them that was more interested as to where all the violence and everything was coming from, suppressing it. And it was right near the end of my little sentence anyway, you know, that so wouldn't have made any difference if I'd have run off. I was only about 4 weeks ago. Yeah. You know what I mean? So realistically, it wasn't something I paid a great deal of attention to. But it still continues to, I still continue to be like that, you know, and I could never seem to get in control of me because I didn't understand what was going on. I only knew there was, you know, a couple of ways to live, you know, and that was, you know, basically, you know, you fight your way through the system. Yeah. You know, at the end of the day, that's how I got brought up. That's, you know, in the middle of Lambeth in London is where I was brought up, and basically, you know, it was a case that you fight for survival, you know, back in those days, and realistically, I did what was ever necessary to get me by. So that's where that all came from. Then I went on to doing some car ringing, basically. Nicking cars, changing the plates, number, you know, and the engine numbers and stuff like that, and selling cars on, which I got nicked for. And I ended up going to prison for that, as well as some burglaries. Yeah. And you know, you might ask the question, well, why are you doing burglaries if you're working? I just needed the extra money. And to be honest with you, I was dealing as well and doing whatever I could.
I'm guessing there's a thrill as well.
Well, yeah, there's an excitement. I belonged in this gang. Yeah. You know what I mean? This is all about. This is a buzz. You know, it's something that's really. I don't know. You're in it. Yeah. You know, I belong here. I can. This is something I can actually do. Right. That perhaps other people can't. And this is how I learned to get by. Yeah. So yeah, I was doing some burglaries and doing some ringing. You know, some of the most craziest things that we used to do back then is we used to rob telephone boxes. Now that is crazy, you know. You go and nick a car. You put your rope and a few other bits and pieces in it. Pull up to where find the place where it's really, you know, in maybe country lanes or something. Yeah, here's a phone box, right? Because not everybody had phones in their house, so they was planted up all over the place. Go in there, take the bulb out, tie up the box, put it on the back of the car, ratchet out, throw the box in the back, and do that. A few of them. You'd be surprised how much money there used to be in telephone boxes. You know, they weren't emptied every day. You know, so I mean, the crazy things that you do, but it's all excitement. Yeah. You know, oh, shh, be careful, take the bulb out. You know, all this kind of stuff. And in some ways, I think it was a kind of addiction too. An addiction to finding ways of getting stuff, right? breaking the law and getting away with it.
Yeah.
You know, fuck you.
Yeah.
Fuck society. Because that's where I felt that I was. I didn't feel that I was fitting into society at all.
And if you think as well, if you think the genius that goes into doing stuff like that, if you actually put it on doing something right,
yeah,
it's amazing when you actually, because the amount of times you sit there and listen, it's like some things are just so smart.
Yeah.
And that's what it is you do have to think outside the box doing them
yeah.
things.
And I mean, when you're in prison, you know, you think to yourself, well, I'm in prison. I mean, I think I've done about 4.5 years in all in little separate sentences. Never ever got done for drugs. That's
really?
Unbelievable. Never ever. I got done for doing, for attempting to burglar a chemist.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the bit where my life changed.
Okay.
But, you know, doing the things that I did gave me a sense of belonging. I belonged somewhere.
Yeah.
And I don't think I ever really knew where I belonged. I don't think I gained any skills as being a father or being a husband.
No.
I never saw anything that encouraged me to be any different because of the way that perhaps I got brought up. But that's no fault of theirs. That all of that is me. You know, that was part of me. You know, my grandmother used to always say, "That's not my Stevie. He wouldn't do that." I was more like the ringleader.
Yeah.
You know, and their belief in me was brilliant. I mean, I had to leave home, right, when I was 16, right? They threw me out. They'd had enough. You know, they couldn't control me. You know, there were times that I'd come home, I'd go to bed, and I'd be in bed for 3 days because I'd been up all week.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there they are feeding me soup and this, that and the other. And then every time I woke up, I'm aggressive, I'm this.
Yeah.
They couldn't cope with me. You know, and I feel bad about that. You know, and when my grandfather died, my grandmother said to me, "This is your fault." And I've always remembered that.
That
And
never will go, will it?
Yeah, that will never go. You know, and I think to myself, maybe that's so. You know, maybe that's so. But my grandfather was a very hard taskmaster, and he tried his best to control me until it got to the stage where he chased me around the house with a carving knife, basically telling me that if you don't fucking behave, I'm going to stab you. Right, you know, and that's when I made the biggest mistake of my life. I punched him. I didn't, you know, I was protecting myself. But that was the last straw. You're out.
Yeah.
You know, I understand that. So I spent quite a time back then, once I'd got thrown out, and my job, you know, I used to get picked up from my house, and I was sleeping in a car. I was living in a car for probably a couple of months.
Yeah.
You know, started to get myself back on my feet, and then, you know, worked it out from there, basically, or went back to work.
And what was it like going from, so obviously going from a detention centre, I'm guessing your next one would have been proper prison.
Yeah.
Was that quite a different experience?
Well, I went from, after that, I was in remand in a place called Ashford, right? Ashford Remand Centre. And I was in there, and I turned 21 when I was in there. So whilst I was on remand, I actually went from there to Brixton.
Oh, okay.
Where I went into, you know, into remand again. And this was a situation, right, where there was a big change. You know, when you're in the remand centre, you all come down and have your meal together, and you meet with other people. One thing I learned about that in that particular place was when I went there, I was put in a cell on my own, couldn't read, couldn't write, and was given a Bible. And I couldn't read it.
Yeah.
Right, and I was in there on my own. So the bit of socialising that I got was when I went down for meals. Other than that, you was just banged up all day. You know, for a youngster, which you know, there was no someone saying like, well, is there anybody you'd like to get in contact with? Is there anybody you'd like us to talk to, or would you like me to help you write a letter? None of that. You're on your fucking own. You're there. And I think that plays with your head too. And at that particular time, when I went in there, I was, you know, I've been on drugs and stuff like that, so I was withdrawing. I had loads of stuff going on.
And with that, again, prison as well, with the drug side, would that help? Was that helpful, or was there nothing? There was just
no, it was nothing. Nothing, right? But once I got to Brixton and stuff like that, I started mixing with other people. There was 2 in a cell or 3 in a cell.
Yeah.
You had other people to talk to, someone to help you write letters and stuff like that. But from that, I got 15 months, and that was in the Worm and Scrubs. So I went in there, done that 15 months. After that, I got arrested again. It was for violence, beating up 3 police officers. And what I was doing is I actually went to book myself into a mental hospital.
Okay.
And I went and obviously pissed out of my head, goes there, I want to come in here, this, that and the other. And they basically refused to help me. And so they wanted me to leave. I wouldn't leave. I was basically saying, I need to come in here, I'm fucked right up, you know. I'm going to kill someone, I'm going to, you know, go mad. So the next thing is they sent police, they come, so I'll let them have it as well. So in reality, it might, you know, that was a stupid thing to do, but I got remanded again. Went into the prison, and on this occasion I ended up going into because I admitted that I was a drug user as well as everything else. I ended up on the hospital wing. Okay. Where you end up being put in a cell, right? At the time they put me in a what do they call it? A straitjacket.
Really?
To stop me from hurting myself or hurting anybody. You know, in a room on its own, which is padded, and you know, it's just a bed on the floor. And you know, and it wasn't until you got yourself into a kind of calmer situation that you actually started to mix with the people in the hospital to do your exercise and stuff like that. But you know, this is a time, right, that I ended up going on to a group with a doctor called Dr. Max Glatt. He was the top man working in prisons. Okay. And that was when I was in the Scrubs doing that sentence. And I found that very useful. You know, it was a man who was talking about addiction, a man who knew all about addiction and had groups with addicts in there and talked about stuff, which I found very interesting. It was about me getting to know who I was or where I came from. Basically, it felt like I'd been dropped in, you know, out of a fucking plane onto the earth and bosh, here you go, get on, what are you going to do, you know, in life. And so, with all this crazy stuff that was going on, you know, I started to get some levelers. But obviously, you know, I was still involved with a lot of these heavy duty guys, and you know, because once you're in with them, you know, like when you're talking about the people that you're working for, selling drugs and stuff like that. When you're in there, right? You don't just get up and walk away. No. You can't walk away from those people. That is for sure. You cannot walk away from them. And that's why, you know, what I did is I had to escape from them. And that's why I did all the things that I did. But I think, you know, coming back to rehabilitation, right, which is really
that was going to be my next question, is what's your thoughts of how, so if we start with the prison rehabilitation first, is what's your thoughts of how that could actually, do you think there's a way they could actually improve it, or do you think what they're doing is the only way they physically, you know, with not only rehabilitation with drugs, but rehabilitation just to get them back on track, get them back to, rather than them keep repeating and doing the same thing over and over again?
Well, it's a constant treadmill that goes around and around. Once you're in the circle, you're in the circle.
Yeah.
You know, prison officers are not really there to help you to get out of the circle. They're there to keep you in the job, right?
Yeah.
You know, at the end of the day, it's the same as all the other things that revolve around it. You know, your judges, your solicitors, your social workers.
Yeah.
A lot of people are quite happy to keep you where you are because they know where you are, right? And it actually keeps a lot of people employed.
Yeah.
But I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that that's what it's all about. I think they may have started off with good intentions, but finding that they're in a place where they're not really moving anything or doing anything.
Yeah.
You know, so if it's, I just think that the prison for working with addicts, we did have a program in Bullingdon Prison, right? And unfortunately, some of the prison officers, or the screws, whatever you want to call them, were actually involved in trying to help people rehabilitate. And they actually got ostracised by their own kind, because they were in there trying to help people sort themselves out who they'd already gone like that. You know, you can't help these people. You know, they're pieces of shit, right? So you had those people over there, that the screws were over there, but you had these ones who were really interested in trying to help people make changes, and ended up being pushed aside, being called care bears and stuff like that, which I don't think it helps when you're actually trying to actually get someone to get involved in a program. I would say that there is a lot of helpful information that can come from drug groups and stuff like that, but the actual rehabilitation itself, there's incentives to go on them. Shorter sentence, helps you with your parole.
Yeah.
Are people actually doing it for the right reason? You know, there were some successes, but very minimal. You know, when it comes to, you know, the amount of time and stuff that's put into it, you'll find that the minimalisation of the period of time that they've got for their rehabilitation and stuff like that may help them out to get some of the things that they need, and some of it may be very useful, you know, to actually install.
Yeah.
Right? And it sometimes that takes them onto another place if they ever get arrested again, which is likely that they do, because they're in that circle and it'll go round and around. And then that's when they may start thinking about proper rehabilitation. So I think it does have a place. But I don't think you can actually say things like a drug-free wing. It sounds like a nonsense.
Yeah.
It's a prison. There shouldn't be any drugs in there, right?
Yeah.
You know, drug-free wing. You think, well, what a load of bollocks.
Mm.
You know, I just feel that that's inappropriate, really, to call it that. But
do you think rehabilitation is cheaper than prison?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Rehabilitation is definitely cheaper than going to prison. The amount of money, I couldn't tell you the prices these days, but certainly when I was working in the system and stuff like that, it was much, much cheaper to send people to rehabilitation, right? And than what it was to send them to prison. You'll find that a lot of these people have been to prison many a times, and just keep going around and going back. The main issue, I believe, is the proper assessment that you give to someone who actually wants to go into rehab. And that has to be very tight and stringent.
Yeah.
In the fact that, how do you pick the right people? You know, you've got a bunch of people here, they're all doing the same thing, they're all using the drugs. Well, how do you pick which one you're going to take? Well, basically the assessment is set up in a way that it gives you tasks. And it's the people who follow the task through who are the ones that actually want to really do something about it. Right? You know, you might say, well, I'd like you to ring me once a week on a Wednesday, 10 o'clock. Right? Doesn't matter if you're in prison or whatever, because you could ask for those calls, you can get them. You need to write me a letter. You need to tell me how you're doing. If you're on a methadone script, I would like you to actually start taking that methadone script down.
Yeah.
Right? Because when they give people methadone scripts these days, they say they're maintenance scripts. Right? They're not. They're permanent. Right? Because that keeps somebody else in a job. Right? They end up putting methadone up rather than taking it down. It's one of the most horriblest drugs that you could ever be on. In the fact that I spent 5 or 6 years on methadone, and it's so mentally addictive that you feel that if you stop taking it, you're going to die.
Yeah.
And that, I know that's crazy, but that's what you think. So you were given these tasks. Talk to your probation officer. Get the probation officer to look into funding with you. So all of these tasks you're giving them, they are actually showing you that they're really interested in doing it. There might be someone over here who's applied for it, can't be bothered doing anything. Right, you're off the list.
Yeah.
Right? So the assessment is the most important thing. Knowing what their commitment is. Getting to know them as a person. Ask them why they want to do it. You know, oh yeah, they all come up with a bullshit. But I've got a wife who's going to leave me. I've got 2 kids. I've been doing this for many years. You know, but that being honest, because when you're looking at them, because you do these interviews face to face, you look at their eyes, you look whether there's anything in there, if there's any sign of them wanting or feeling that they're reaching out. You can see this stuff, you can hear it, you know. So the assessment is absolutely spot on. The other thing that we used to do is we had a thing which was called a bowel assessment, where a person would go, this is my route actually, the route that I took when I went into the Leys. I got done for this chemist, right? And I ended up on remand. And my doctor, Dr. Kellum his name was, from Cardiff Hospital, he used to give me my scripts of methadone. Anyway, I'm in prison. He's come in to see me, see how I am and stuff like that. And he's talked to me about going to rehabilitation. I thought, oh. I said, yeah, and how does that work? And he said, oh, well, what happens is you go to rehabilitation. But because he knew, he'd tried hypnotherapy and all stuffs with me, and it never worked. So he started talking to me about the Leys community and what it does and everything else. It's got a high reputation, you know, but you'll be there, you won't be going home at weekends, you won't have any money, you won't have any phones, you won't have nothing. You're going there with nothing, and you'll stay there till such times that you get rehabilitated. And I thought, fucking hell, I don't know whether I fancy that, you know, because rehabilitation is very hard. You have to be a bit ruthless.
I'm guessing because you have to actually officially accept.
You have to accept that you're going to be told a little bit about yourself that you might not want to know.
Yeah.
You're going to be confronted about who you are. You know, that's not easy.
No.
You're a fucking bully, you know. And you think, well, I'm never a bully. I'm assertive. You know, you find other ways of making the excuse of what it is. So, what part was I?
Oh, you were saying about the Leys. He was telling you about the Leys.
Oh, me going into the Leys through this situation. Anyway, I thought about it, and I had to go back to court. And and he said to me, he said, "I'll tell you what I can do." He said, "I can get you out of prison, right, and get you to go into our hospital in Landock." I went, "Oh, right." He said, "But there are some rules." I said, "Well, what's that then?" He said, "Well, first of all, you don't get no drugs. You don't get an aspirin for an headache. You get nothing. You're going there to wait for a place in the Leys community." Right. I thought, oh, that sounds okay. You get no visitors. Any visitors that come to visit you, they will be searched. Their bags or whatever they bring will be searched. And there'll be a staff member with you all the time. I thought, oh. And if you want to go anywhere, you have to go with a staff member. I thought, fucking hell. So anyway, I said, yeah, all right, yeah, I'm up for it. So I'm thinking, I still think I'm wise, you see. I think, right, go on, smart ass. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, right, I'll do all this. So I ends up in the hospital. And whilst I'm in the hospital, I started looking at some of the other people that was in there. I wasn't on a drug unit, I was on a mental health unit. And there were some people in there that, you know, you sort of see them dribbling and they can't talk and they can't, and you think, well, what the fuck are you doing, Steve? You're throwing look at this. And there was a bloke in there who was having a visit from his daughter the next day. And he said to me, he said, will you give me a shave? He said, I've got a visit tomorrow. I said, yeah, of course I will. And that was a bit of a turning point for me. This bloke was in one hell of a state, shaking, this, that and the other, and he didn't want any of the nurses or anything to do it. He asked me to do it, and I did it. And the thing is I did that, and a couple of days later he died. And that really fucking hit home with me. The same as the pictures of my children on the wall in my bedroom, you know. These things started to actually register. Kids going without, this, that and the other. Man in here, can't help himself, mental health situation, can't even shave. And here you are, there's fuck all wrong with you, you know. But there was something wrong, but you know what I mean, as far as looking at other people's situation, on face value, I could do something about it, and they couldn't. So whatever his strategy was, the doctor, it was starting to work. So then I go to court. The court sends me to the Leys community on a court order for 3 months. So anyway, gets there, and I was very hard to sort of confront and stuff like that. I was quite difficult. I wasn't on any drugs or anything, but I was quite difficult to manage. But I managed it, right? And after 3 months, I go back to court and they have to send a report to say how I'm doing. Well, they said, well, he is actually participating in the programme. He is actually, you know, going somewhere. We're quite happy to have him back. So the court sent me back for another 3 months. I'm thinking after 3 months, the court order's finished, right? I'd go back and I'd have it off on my toes, because I'm still thinking, like, you know, I don't want this. In the second 3 month, right, I actually really started to look at a lot of things that were being put to me. I was put on a contract, and a contract is where you work on your own for nearly 3 months. It was on a dish pan, right? Whereas, because I'd had so many relationships broken, they saw that I had an attitude towards women, right? And I didn't really recognise it, but I did. And all my relationships, if they didn't work the way that I wanted them to, right, then I would lose it. I'd go off. I'd be violent. I'd be whatever, which is obviously a thing that I felt very strongly about, is that, you know, I couldn't control myself. And then I actually really worked out where a lot of it came from. It came from the fact that I never had a mother figure, a proper mother figure. And all those girlfriends that I had were paying the price for being abandoned by my mother. So all of this education is gradually coming in through rehabilitation. But rehabilitation doesn't take 12 weeks.
No.
You don't share anything with anybody within 12 weeks. You know, if you want to know my name and address, I'll think about it. You know, it takes time. And so this is why I say that rehabilitation today is respite. It's not rehabilitation, because you have to actually get yourself into a place where you're safe, where you can be stripped down like an onion. And we get to the core of where the problem starts. And then you allow people to put themselves back together without putting the bad parts back in it.
Yeah.
Right? You make them live in a different location. You don't let them go back to their old homes, old places, because they'll be going back to the same scene they left. And there'll be people there that will encourage you to be and behave in the way that you were before. It wouldn't take 5 minutes before someone's knocking on your door. Listen, I've got a bit of gear. Do you want some? Oh, no, I don't want none. No, they'll just keep coming back until you do, because that's their way of earning money.
Yeah.
So it keeps them on their gear. So they're reluctant to let you go. So you don't go back to there. You actually live not far away from the rehabilitation. The rehabilitation comes in more than one sense, right, which is 3 months is your safety net period, right, where you're getting in and you're learning things and you're picking up things and you start taking responsibility. It's like being reborn, really. You know, like you're a child when you're in your 3 months. Then there's your second 3 months where you're starting to actually examine and look at what's going on for you, why you're where you are. Then there's the next 3 months, which is you actually rehabilitating yourself and getting involved in voluntary work outside the community, which will end up getting you a reference. And then after that, you will end up and go out and get a job and live in the community on site for another 3 to 4 months, where it is compulsory saving out of their wages, so that they actually have money to get a place to move out to. So there are 4 stages, not just one where you get in, get out, see you later, you're okay, because all they are is straight. And then the next thing they do is they go out, they use, they're dead, because they start using what they was using when they went in.
Yeah.
So this whole idea of some of this rehabilitation that they're offering is a nonsense. You know, you've got people, right, that would dearly love to be treated properly, but they don't know how to actually assess them. They don't know the staff team don't know how to handle them, right? Unless you've got the right mixture. You know, I mean, obviously you're going to need people in finance. You're going to need people in every step of it, you know, to be involved with the funders, and every aspect takes all different characters within a rehab situ, right? There's no shortcut to actually fixing someone or making someone, or not making them, but giving them the opportunity to make changes. I had a person who was a lifer. I took a chance on him. He'd been in prison for many, many years. He was squatting in a house with another fella. There was 2 squatters in there and the guy who got murdered. He was a drug user as well as an alcoholic. He murdered, or he was convicted of murdering him. Up until he came to the Leys community, he was still questioning whether it was him or not. Never ever accepted that it was him, that it was the other person, but he's the one who got convicted. So he ended up with a life sentence. He'd been in prison numerous times for it, come out on parole, out for no time whatsoever, right? Drinking, he'd be in a pub, you know, still resentful about the time that he's done in prison, still not accepting the fact that, you know, what has been is what it is, right? Has a few drinks here and there. Next thing is, gets nicked, recalled, back to his sentence. Life. Done that 3 times, right? So I goes to see the guy in prison. I do an interview with him. I tell him what my expectations are. I say to him, look, I think I can do something for you. And I bring him into the program. Bearing in mind, this guy is 60 odd years of age,
Okay.
right? Usually you're treating people much younger.
Yeah.
Right, but anyway, this is him. So he comes into the program. I teach him all the things. Well, I don't personally, but I get involved in teaching him. And we get to the crux of the matter. He could not accept that he never ever knew whether he killed this person or not. He always wanted to try and get even with the system. He never let it go because he couldn't, right? But we actually found, you know, when we talked about the stuff that we just talked about and realised where he was coming from and what was creating the issue, it worked out that he realised that it didn't matter how many times he retaliated against it, it was never going to change from the way that it is.
Yeah.
He had to, it was about acceptance, about accepting whether it was right or wrong is irrelevant. What is relevant is that you have a life to live and that you can be outside and get your, you know, get some stuff together and enjoy the rest of your life rather than spending it in prison.
Yeah.
And it was about teaching him those things, right? That it is possible, and it was possible, and he was successful. By the time he actually moved out of the program, he couldn't go to work because he was on benefits, because he was at that age where, you know, work available for him and stuff like that wasn't much good. We went through at the council and other people. He ended up with his own flat, you know, 1-bedroom flat on his own, right? He ended up doing voluntary work for people, and he lived a normal life right up until when he died, which was about 10 years later.
Wow.
And I went to his funeral with Chris. Me and Chris went to his funeral, and his family couldn't thank us enough for what we'd done for him. It's not what we had done for him, it's what he had done for himself with the you know, with the positive guidance that he received. You couldn't, if you couldn't get into that man after him doing 12 years, we're talking about rehabilitating someone. We got into his mind and sorted him out within less than 12 months.
Yeah.
So it speaks for itself. You know, the amount of people that are outside at the moment who are all involved in drug related jobs, who come from the Leys, actually run by people from the Leys, ex-addicts, you know, like drop-ins and stuff like that. Loads of them are actually working really, really well and getting the funding. Our biggest problem, right, with drugs and rehabilitation is someone to understand what is actually needed. Years ago, they used to have a SAR who was very good, who worked with the government, right, who was actually an ex-addict, right, and he knew all the loops, all the things, all the strokes that they're going to pull, right, and he gave them the information, and funding became quite easy. But, you know, these are people, you know, that are our people. They're our people, you know, who are in need of sorting out their life, right? Who could become very productive in helping other people, you know, working in voluntary services, working in anything, right? You know, some of them have ended up with jobs that you wouldn't believe. You know, I've got a friend of mine who's got a big chandelier company, right? You know, who was a junkie, right? Got other people in other situations where they've grown and, you know, produced very good things, good families, working, very constructive and always there. NA is a very good thing, right? But it's not for everyone, you know? It's people that need that constant, you know, refreshing all the time, keeping themselves on the ball. You know, that's okay. You know, some people need to be kept on the ball, you know, but there's a whole thing about rehabilitation which is being missed. And it's not productive to keep sending people around in the same circle, backwards and forwards to prison, right? When in actual fact, they're missing the chance of maybe where some of those people can actually get rehabilitated and become good members of society and give a lot back.
Yeah.
And help out. You know, Chris, for instance, I took Chris under my wing many, many years ago. I don't think Chris will mind me saying Lambriani, right? But he worked for many years with me in rehabilitation, right? Good friends of mine, done the world of good, considering the kind of person that people class him as and have looked at him as, right? That is not who Chris really was.
No.
That was about how things was back in that day. Unfortunate situation to be in, but it happens. Not everybody gets where they get down to wanting to be like that. Circumstances treat people in different ways. Yes, we're all adults. We all accept the fact that what we do is our responsibility. But there are some justifications. Not that I think that you should use them, but you should always remember that you didn't arrive here, that bad person. You know, you arrived there as a young kid.
Yeah.
Right? And how you've turned out has a lot to do with your upbringing, the way things are. When you look at the society today, and you look at what's going on at this present moment in this country about money, are you at any wonder as to why we're in the situation we're in when we've got a government, right, who don't understand the needs of its own people?
No.
Rehabilitation being one of them, right? Looking after its old people that have been in wars and trying to rob them of their pensions and other bits and pieces that go with that. People that are homeless, and here we are in a situation where we think it's okay to give all our money away to other people, right, when we got our own people struggling. If they were in a situation where they'd actually stop giving money to these people, they'd have no reason to come here, right? If they stuck a boat in the middle, right, between here and France or wherever they come from, and told them, you're not coming past here. If you come past here, right, we're going to just send you straight back. You're not coming here to get any money. There is no respite for you here. Not because we're being horrible, but we have our own people and our own country to look after. And there are many people in this country that need to be looked after. Look at our veterans. Look at the people suffering with post-traumatic stress disorders. Look at the people who, you know, commit suicide. Look at the people that are not being paid for from the post office, even though it's been proven that they're not wrong. Because who's hanging on to their money? The government. Why are they hanging on to their money? Because they're too busy pleasing everybody else and giving everybody else something. Why can't it just be given to us?
Yeah.
The people that earn it, the people who's paid the taxes, the insurances. You know, you think you're going to answer the question by putting up more taxes, robbing us of more? You're just creating people to be stressed, end up using alcohol, drugs, and other bits and pieces that go on in this world. Robbery, prisons. They have their own answer. It's a shame that they don't fucking use it.
Yeah.
You know, that's how I feel, right? I feel very passionate, right? You know, you got these people, they say they're passionate about their country, they're passionate about their people, they're passionate. They've got no passion. They're ignorant. They're very ignorant.
If they did, things would change.
No.
So.
No, they don't think people have changed. They don't give people chances. But they'd rather give someone who comes into this country wearing a burqa, who could be walking around with a machine gun, we don't know who the fuck they are, they think it's great.
Yeah.
Eh?
Yeah.
Great. That's a part of the old me coming out, you know, because that's how I feel about what is happening here. We have loads of honourable people, people that need care and attention and looking after. It just happens to be that my passion is more maybe about, you know, the drugs and the way that people are, because I've been there, I've done it, and I've worked in it. But I also have a passion for all the other things that are going on. All the other people, you know, imagine, right? You're sitting at home and you've got to work out whether you're going to have
Food or heating.
or whether you're going to have food.
Yeah.
How dare they even dream of doing such a thing? You know, these people, some of them have been in the trenches for you.
Risk their own life.
Risk their own life for this country. Yeah. And there they are. Hang on a minute, how much can we take off of that person? Oh, don't worry, we'll give it to them over there. I don't, why are we still giving money to other countries? You know, I'm not against helping anybody. But you can only help people to a certain degree. You can only help them as far as you can afford. Right? We have gone past affording when you look at what we're in this country and the debts we're in. But it was the Conservatives. It's not. They're all a bunch of fucking liars. Can't keep to the truth.
No.
Yeah. I'm an ex-crook, ex-villain, and an arsehole. I've got to sit here and think about that, and I just think to myself, you're looking in the wrong direction, mate. You need to take a look in the fucking mirror.
Yeah.
I think I can finish there.
I think that settles it very well. Yeah. No, that was really interesting. Thank you for coming in. It was good listening to you.
I mean, obviously there's bits and pieces that, you know, maybe I should have said or I've forgotten or, you know, but it's just so difficult.
Yeah.
Right? When you see people that are really trying hard to help people and do things, and there they are just cocking it all up. Just, they're not interested.
They're not. No. Well, no, thank you very much.
I hope that was useful.
That was very useful.